to our third and final game. Illinois at Purdue. Purdue's favored by 11 here. 53.5 is what I'm showing for a total. First of all, Illinois. I think we just got to get it out of the way. What a collapse in that one. I think that it was 17-10, right? With about, I think, 5 minutes left. And they ended
Yep.
up giving up a field goal and a touchdown. I mean, that was a pretty tough loss right there. And it was a complete 360 from what we saw in their first game with Nebraska. And now I think we're starting to see maybe what this Illinois team is. But hey, they're back at it. I think this team and Bielema will be ready to go just from his mentality and how he coaches. So I'm not too worried about that. But what I am worried about is the talent gap, right? Does Illinois have enough talent to hang here with Purdue on the road? So what are your thoughts with this one?
Well, first off, let's say this. As somebody who was on the Notre Dame Purdue game on Saturday, I watched that game, and when their star wide receiver David Bell hit the turf, it was a little scary for a while. He didn't move, but he's in concussion protocol now. One of the best, arguably the best, one of the three best wide receivers inside the Big Ten, and we know that the Big Ten has the two Ohio State kids, Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, and David Bell's right there with them.
Yeah.
So maybe he doesn't play, and if he doesn't play, Ben, it gets a little worse for Purdue because his backup, Mershawn Rice, is out as well. So you lose, you're down to a third team at that position. Now, they're lucky they're fairly deep at wide receiver, but for a team that's so dependent upon throwing the football, to have their number one go down, and when a number one as good as he is, that's a significant hit. And to have his backup gone as well, or out as well, that's a significant hit too. I wish that they were playing a Big Ten team this week that was capable of throwing the football downfield. If they were, I would have no issue whatsoever playing. And I like Purdue, but I would have no issue playing against them. What I saw last week out of Notre Dame's wide receivers running free all over the field all game long and just not connecting. If Illinois with Brandon Peters and Brett Bielema's style to begin with, he's not really going to push it down the field. Although that's their biggest advantage here. I mean,
It is.
if they're going to have to protect because Karlaftis off the edge, they've got two bookend defensive ends that are going to be tough. They'll have to protect, and I don't know that their offensive line is good enough to hold up for an entire game. They're probably not. But I will say that, even though my power ratings show this exact number, Purdue minus 11.5, for some reason I find that to be a big number. I just think that's, to ask them to win. And this is a team, I was reading something interesting this morning. Purdue, since Jeff Brom got there, has been favored 15 times. And straight up, let's not even talk about the point spread, but straight up, they've only won 7 and lost 8 when they're favorites. So they don't even really win games, never mind cover games. So 11.5 off of Notre Dame, which is your rival. Maybe Illinois is angry. For what it's worth, Illinois lost a couple running backs in that game who will both play this week. But they had their moments running the football against Maryland. They really did. And I would think that, Bielema, in my estimation, is probably good enough on the sidelines to keep this thing within 11.5 points, especially if Bell doesn't go. I could see Bell creating havoc if he's in the game. But as we speak right now, Ben, if you read between the lines of what we're seeing here early in the week, it doesn't look like he'll go. I don't think they'll take any chances with an NFL first or second rounder.
I was just gonna say that with this number, it's leaning towards him not playing because I think if he's in, you'd probably see this move or see something closer to a 12, maybe, just because he makes that much difference in this offense. Sometimes I see this a lot, Rob, and I'm sure you do too. It's almost like they put the number kind of in the middle, right? Where it's to say if he's going to play or not play. But they can also just let the line move if they feel strongly. But I just feel like at 11, it kind of shades a little over to him not playing, I would assume. Is that kind of what you're seeing?
Well, it probably would be. And again, I don't know how much odds makers account for wide receivers
It's true.
in the line. Often we can find a lot of value as bettors in other position groups that aren't quarterback.
Even offensive line at times, too.
Right.
We saw with the
If
Colts with
there's cluster
Fisher.
injuries across the front, you're right. It's just not accounted for in the point spread very much. Not the way it is for a quarterback. So
No.
um, my biggest thing here is, and I think I would lean Illinois in this game just because I think the points are heavy here. Um, Boy, I wish I could depend on Brett Bielema to take advantage of his
Yeah.
biggest advantage in the game, but he's a stubborn, prehistoric offensive style coach, right? He wants to run the football. Notre Dame couldn't run it last week against Purdue. So what would make me believe that Illinois can run it against Purdue? But again, they're so pass dependent on offense, and Illinois, they didn't do a terrific job against Maryland because I think in the end they gave up about 480 yards. But Maryland is a more explosive offense than Purdue. Maryland's a scary offense,
Yeah.
and somehow, some way, with a little luck, I will say Illinois had a couple of situations go their way until the end when they lost. I could make these arguments back and forth, which leads me to believe when I'm kind of in that mindset, let's take 11.5 points. Not that I'm going to do it, but if I was, again, like you said before, gun to head, I think you play Illinois plus 11.5 here. I think you can count on them to be able to do enough damage run-wise. And without David Bell, Purdue will have to find another way to consistently move the football. Milton Wright's a good receiver. They can do some things, but consistently, not so sure.
I have to lean with Illinois here, but I don't know if I'm going to bet this myself. I was looking at the first half lines. I only looked at 2 spots, and it's at 6.5. I doubt I'm going to find a 7 unless we see the line full game move up. Just kind of doing math in my head, I would be surprised if any 7s pop up when it's still at a full game at 11. But first half might be interesting. We'll see, 6.5. But yeah, I lean Illinois here. I think I don't want to call it a bounce back spot necessarily. If they could just eliminate how they played in the last 5 minutes, they might cover this one. So it's not technically a bounce back, but it's more like can we recover from what happened in that fourth quarter? And the way he coaches, I do have some confidence that those players at least are going to be ready to go. But it just kind of comes down to, can they stop Purdue on offense when they need to?
And we've talked a lot about strength of opponent's schedule so far during this show, Ben, but let's put it to use here in this game. Knowing what we know now, Illinois played Nebraska, who really defensively shut down Oklahoma last week, right?
They've only gone up since the first game, we'll put it that way.
Yeah, especially defensively. Offensively, but defensively, they looked really good. They played Texas San Antonio, who is legitimately one of the top 3 contenders for CUSA. They played Virginia, who we've seen nothing but explosive offense. Now they get buried by North Carolina. They give up 59, but they get to 40 just about. They get to 39 against UNC. And then they play Maryland, another explosive offense. So of those teams, Purdue doesn't necessarily blow you away in comparison to Nebraska, Virginia, Maryland. So I think 11.5 might be steep here for them. And like you say, there's a little bit of trust. Even you could say negative things about Brett Bielema and his style, but there's a little bit of trust that he'll get his team involved in a close game, whether he wins it or loses it. But you feel like, I can count on this guy to be in one of those close type games in the fourth quarter, and 11.5 just seems like a lot.
Doesn't 53.5 seem a little high, or is that just me?
Without David Bell, it would.
Yeah.
To me, like I say, there's issues on both sides for the offense. Can Illinois protect their quarterback? Can Purdue find a way to move the football without Bell? Bell attracts so much attention. One of those guys that's going to draw the double right away. And now defenses don't have to worry about that if he's not in the game. Now you can play more straight up.
Exactly.
against that Purdue team, and they're not a team that can run the football. So it's a real tough loss for Purdue.
Yeah, and someone here said that if they think Illinois might cover if Bell doesn't play, and they were saying that with Minnesota up next week, that does make sense, right? But at the same time, I think from Purdue side, this this is a close enough type of game, and maybe the coaches know of the spreads and not, but they still prepare for the most part very much the same, unless it's like a FCS opponent or someone who is just terrible this year, but they're still going to be ready to go. Maybe they put in some plays for the scout team, but I don't see that with this one just because it's a conference game. They're going to have to be ready to go, but they do want to make sure that Bell is ready to go. And with a concussion, it's tough, right? I would say maybe like a 25-30% chance he plays. I'm just kind of putting out a number there. I just don't see it happening, really.
Yeah, and I think well, two things here. Not only is it a conference game, Ben, I would dispose of the look ahead theory to Minnesota,
Mm-hmm.
only because Illinois is a division team as well. They're both from the West. So this is a
Yeah,
huge game for Purdue. You got to beat a team like this, right? And
you
for
have to.
Illinois as well. Illinois is not going to get, they're not going to beat Wisconsin. They're not going to beat Iowa. They're not going to beat those teams in their division. So,
You got to beat the ones like this that are.
and they've got a 1-0 head start in that division by beating Nebraska. Where David Bell is concerned, my thought is that his status, his NFL draft status, leads me to believe that the kid will have a lot to say. So obviously, team doctors are first and foremost. But even if he's semi-cleared, the kid and his parents will have a lot to say about whether or not they don't take an extra week off just to be safe. You know what I mean? I don't think he'll go here. I really don't.
Yeah, and
That could change end of week, but who knows?
I agree. I mean, at the end of the day, even if they clear him, he could say no, and they would just
Yeah.
report it as he's not ready to go. So we would
Yeah.
never know one way or another. So you have that working against it too. So I'm just thinking with this number currently, right? I try to think a few steps ahead, but I don't know if it moves or not. I don't know. It's hard. It's really hard to say if it's already completely booked into the number, which I do agree with you. I don't think he's warranted like a point or two, but we see it time and time again with market overreactions where people will just say, "Oh, Bell's out. We're gonna slam the other side," right? So it's hard to say.
It's funny because people like you and I that follow college football, the entire FBS on a weekly basis will know the name David Bell. The casual bettor won't really even know who David Bell is. I mean, that guy will get drafted to
I guess
somebody's
that's true.
favorite team, and they still won't know. They'll be like, "Who's this Bell guy from Purdue that the Falcons just
Yeah,
drafted?" If you're a Falcon fan, I don't think he's not somebody
he's not.
nationally known,
Yeah, that's a
um,
good point. It's not
like
a.
Chris
It's not a.
Olave.
Yeah, it's not. If Olave was out, yeah, and he's not a
Right.
quarterback, so he's not like the star. That's a really good point. I think sometimes we or even me in this situation, we just get too in the weeds with stuff. Maybe we overthink it a tad. So, all right, we have a question here.